So I've had aviation photographers on the show a number of times in the past couple of years, but today's subject is a little bit different. Today's subject is one that makes me smile. I will explain in a sec. Let's go behind the shot. Hi, welcome to Behind the Shot. I'm Steve Brazill. This is the show where we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind the shot, from conception to completion, and all the challenges and stories that happen in between. As always, if you want to find the show notes for this particular episode or any episode that I do, head on over to the website. It's behindtheshot.tv. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, I put all the links in that blog post at behindtheshot.tv and a little bit that I write about my guest. But if you're watching on YouTube, I can't put the full blog post there, but I do put a lot of the links and descriptions and stuff like that down below the like and subscribe button. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, it's harder to do in a podcast. You can just drag the slider if you're doing that. But if you're on YouTube and you want to jump past the interview, just get right down to the dissection of the photo or something like that, there are chapter markers down below. Please feel free to jump to wherever you want. So let's jump into this. Please welcome to the show, Wichita, Kansas-based photographer, Brett Schauf. Brett, how are you, man?
Outstanding, Steve. Great to finally meet up with you and get to be honored to be on your show.
It is my pleasure. You say nice to meet up with you. We should say thank you to Dr. T, Larry from Platypod, for introducing us, because Larry's a good friend of both of ours, and so it was nice of him to make the connection. I'm excited
Absolutely.
to have you on for a couple of reasons. I mentioned at the beginning that today's subject is one that makes me smile. It's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I'll explain that as we go through, but I always start the show with a little get to know the guest. That way, people who don't know you, don't know your work, don't know your history, can get an idea of, look, this is Brett. This is why you want to listen to what Brett says. And the subject matter that we're touching on today is interesting to me, because when you go look at your website or your bio, you're kind of described, or at least I think of you, as a commercial portrait fine art photographer. You've got some landscape and travel on your site in there as well. But you do aviation photography, something I think has just got to be a blast, including classic warbirds. That's where our focus is going to go today. But I'm curious, for a commercial portrait landscape type photographer, how the hell did aviation photography and classic warbirds even come about?
You know, some days you just get lucky and you're in the right spot at the right time. From a commercial standpoint, Wichita, Kansas, it's the air capital of the world. So we have aircraft manufacturers. We have a very rich history of building aircraft. And a lot of the legacy aircraft are still serviceable and flying. And it's a great place to be from. So when I transitioned into the commercial photography world, from the portrait and wedding and all of that, it was a natural fit to just get ingrained and start working with the aviation industry. I spent a lot of time just doing a lot of the, and still do a lot of the just day-to-day photography, whether it be engineering test photography or customers coming in or covering events, but just really worked on getting to know the business, getting to know the client, getting to know their business, and just, took advantage of the opportunities I'd get when they were presented to me. And when, ultimately they'd ask you to do air to air and start doing marketing photos, you just, took advantage the best I could of making sure I went above and beyond. And like I said, just really went for it.
So I mentioned at the beginning again that this subject puts a smile on my face. The reason is, as we were going back and forth, going through your site, trying to pick a shot that we were going to discuss, and we kind of knew that it was going to be, classic aviation warbird type stuff. It makes me think of my dad, who is not with us anymore, but my dad flew P-51s and P-40s. And so my entire youth growing up was my dad either with his model airplanes all over the place. He used to build, model airplanes, and I have a closet full of them now that he never built. And he used to always say he wanted to build a miniature P-51 that he could fly. So today's subject matter, to say it's near and dear to my heart is kind of an understatement, but I think of aviation photography. And again, I've done aviation photography on the show before, but when I think of aviation photography, I kind of think of it like what I do, which is music photography. And here's the connection I make there. It's hard to get clients in music photography because it's a guarded area, right? You can't just go into any concert with a camera. To get a portfolio built, you have to get into a concert with a camera, but you can't get into a concert with a camera unless you can show somebody a portfolio of your work. And I kind of think of aviation photography like that. It's like you can't just say, I want to fly up next to this B-29 and photograph it so that I can go to, an airport and try and get aviation clients. What happens when Brett, okay, here we go. When Brett thinks to himself, I want to shoot, birds in flight, meaning airplanes in flight. I need to get up there and shoot some. How does one go about getting these clients when one doesn't already have these clients?
That's $1 million question almost. So much of it is when it came time to build the portfolio is just taking advantage of the opportunities like we were talking about earlier. I spent a lot of time shooting on the ground, shooting airplanes on the ground. I spent a lot of time studying, researching, trying to find people I could go up with and learn from. And then when the opportunity came, you just relied on having that, at least that basic knowledge or that introduction to it, that you're able to go out and start putting things together. I don't care how many times you go up and how many times you've gone up and shot, you always learn something. There's something new every time, a curveball thrown at you every time. But it's really just, for me, it's been just being in the right place, the right time, taking advantage of the opportunities I've gotten. So much of the Warbird photos that I've been able and fortunate to do have been because I've had a relationship with the B-29. I was asked to come out and help just document some of the ground operations, some of the restoration process. First time they fired up the engines, the first time they flew it, they were needing somebody in town to kind of lead that process and cover it. And one thing led to another, and I've kind of integrated myself into one of the crew. I go out on tour with them. I'll spend anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks at a time traveling around the country. Photography and videography is a part of that, but there is a lot more involved with media relations or dealing with veterans and dealing with the public and making sure they have the great experience that we want to give them, educating the younger generations about, why we want to keep these Warbirds flying, the history of it, the heroes, that generation that sacrificed so much so that we have what we have today. So I guess that digressed into a whole lot of stuff.
No, but that makes total sense. And when I had Moose Peterson on, it wasn't a classic Warbird per se, but he does a lot of the same things where he photographs these classic Warbirds in just the most amazing light. And most people think, again, it kind of relates to you. Most people think of Moose Peterson as this amazing nature and wildlife photographer, documentarian really, and yet he's an amazing aviation photographer. So I've got a question for you. And I ask this question now. I didn't used to, but I've started asking this question of every guest because I think it says a lot about how we see what we do. So not aviation photography, photography in general. What makes a great photograph great?
The answer is different for every person you ask, because we all perceive things differently. But for me, it has to move you. There has to be something that moves and speaks to you, whether it be, an airplane or a portrait or, a landscape. There's got to be an element that talks to the viewer, that leaves them almost wanting more, that creates a window into some place they want to be or something they want to do. Or it elicits a response or a memory. So all the technical stuff aside, because we all know the technical aspects that make a portrait or make a photograph great, but it's just the content, it's the timing, it's bringing all the elements of subject and light and circumstance together to create or elicit a response or an emotion. Most of my favorite works, there's some emotional tie to them. And I think if you can create that bond with your client or with the ultimate end user, it's going to be recognized as a great photo.
So what I find interesting about that answer is that fits what I shoot in music photography so well as well, right? We try and capture a moment, But what I try and explain to people is don't just show the thing that everybody saw. Take the shot that makes the people who were at the concert remember the show. The people who were not at the concert realize what the show was like, and show some of those things that also give people seats they didn't have, which is kind of what you just described. When you show behind the scenes, it's not just that you're showing, behind stage, you're showing people the seat that they didn't get. Oh, that's what it looks like from on stage looking out at the audience. And it's the exact same thing that you described. But when you take a plane in the air, things change a little bit. I guess it doesn't even have to be in the air, right? Even a plane parked on a runway, it does change a little bit because it's a different kind of movement than a natural. So a man-made object's movement, banking, propellers, whatever, is different than a natural object like an animal or a human or something like that. So looking just at aviation photography, where you don't have facial expression or a moment or a jump in the air, or what makes an aviation photo great?
To me, a lot of times it comes down to composition and lighting. Just to create, like you said, that inanimate object, but somehow give it life, give it motion, give it movement. Even if it's a static on-ground portrait or marketing photo of an airplane, to make it dynamic, whether that's through use of color, use of light, environment, whatever it is, but to just create something different, a different perspective or different angle, that just makes the plane almost look sexy. I rarely shoot. I rarely shoot at eye level because that's what everybody sees. That's what everybody's used to. If I walk up to a plane and shoot a 50 millimeter camera lens at eye level, I'm capturing what they see every day. If I change that and I back off, 40, 50, 60 feet, and I shoot a 200 millimeter lens, and I use that compression, and I build in some cool lighting elements in the background, and maybe I'm throwing a couple lights in there to accentuate certain areas of the plane. It's even though they've seen that plane 1,000 times, they've never seen it that way. And so I guess to me, that's, just trying to present the subject in a unique perspective.
It's funny. I was judging an image competition for, who was it for? PPLAC, I think, Professional Photographers at LA County. And there was a landscape image, and it was a gorgeous landscape image. But I said something to the effect after I judged it, and they called on me to say a few things about the shot. I made the comment, I'm guessing you're 6 foot tall, whoever took this. Like, you don't know who took the shot. But this, from this shot, this is a 6 foot person walked into this landscape scene, picked up their camera and took a picture. I'm not saying it's a snapshot, but it's a snapshot, right? If anybody just walking by, oh, there, boom, and hold up your camera and take a picture, one of the best ways to improve your photography is simply not to be the guy that's 6 foot off the ground. And that's the viewpoint you're giving everybody, because everybody else that sees it is, 5'5" to 6'3". That's what they see already, right? And I mean, I suppose there's some argument you're documenting it at that point, but still, just changing that angle of attack can be amazing in landscape, in music, in aviation. But since you do both, you're more qualified than me to really speak to this. What is the connection that you feel between your landscape work and your aviation work? And I'm asking that for a reason which people will better understand when they see the shot we're going to talk about today.
Probably the color. Just color and lighting has always drawn me. And I know that's extraordinarily cliche, but just dynamic lighting, dynamic colors, bold colors, or bold black and whites and high contrast. But it's with aviation, with landscape. I mean, so many times you're shooting static images, and you're using that light, you're using that composition just to build the drama, to create a dramatic view. you take some of those aspects when you go do an air to air, you take a lot of that with you. It's just understanding, when's the light going to be just right. That's going to give me that, the ground is your background at that point. I want the light coming across. I want some dark shadows on the ground. At the same time, I want the plane just to have that kick of light, that highlight.
That's a perfect description. And by the way, when I look through your site, I do this with every guest that I have. I kind of look through their site for common threads, and the common thread that I see is something you just mentioned, which is this mix of vibrancy in your color, not unrealistic, just vibrant, and contrast. Right? Your pictures are not. I don't mean flat, even as an insult to people here, but your pictures are not flat. Your pictures have punch, both in color and contrast, which I love. Let's get into this shot. Before we do, just a quick reminder for everybody. This show, first and foremost at least, is available wherever you get your podcasts. If you go to the website behindtheshot.tv, I have so many ways that you can subscribe to this show in an audio-only format, which is a little bit more difficult because we are talking about photography. I am showing photos as well, and this is recorded as video. But if your podcast outlet of choice only support, like Spotify, only supports audio only, that's okay. Or if that's your preference, if you want to listen while you drive, that's okay. I have a lot of people tell me they listen while they're driving in Apple Podcasts or whatever, or YouTube Music or something. But then what they do is they go to the website and they look at the photo. A lot of times they will wait. They'll let me describe the photo first, and then they'll go to the website and see if the picture in their head was accurate. But if your podcast outlet of choice supports video, this show is available in video too. So if you go to Apple Podcasts, you search for Behind the Shot, you'll see an audio only or a video version. Subscribe to both. Subscribe to the one that you want. Doesn't matter to me, whichever one. If you want to watch on YouTube, the video obviously is also on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe and all that type stuff. All the links are in the description on YouTube. Full blog post write-up over on the blog post. Now, before we bring up this shot, little background. For about 10 years, almost 10 years, you've been the lead photographer of the B-29 Doc, which is, you mentioned earlier, it's this restored World War II bomber. And you said something interesting earlier. You said you basically became one of the crew. And I think that is key in my head. I'm curious if I'm right, because being part of the team, I think gives you different access than even if you have all access, but you're not part of the team. But am I correct that it also changes how you see the subject? Just the fact that you're actually accepted in the room, not just the guy with the camera?
It does. Specifically, it really helps when you're capturing the people. But the crew has been really good in understanding why I'm there and what I'm trying to accomplish when I have the camera in my hand, and work with me. And it makes it a lot easier when your team works together and they give you that access, or they can give you a heads up when something's coming, or you know in advance, especially when you're on the ground shooting, you know where they're going to be, when they're going to be there, things like that. When you go to do an air-to-air, having that knowledge of how the plane handles, how the plane flies, what the pilot's limitations are, creating those communication channels just help to put everybody in a great position, whether it be lighting, formation, and obviously whenever you're flying, there's a big safety factor involved. So it does help. It creates a bond, but I think more importantly, you have a greater understanding of why you're doing it, or the importance of the plane. When you sit inside a World War II bomber and you talk to a 101-year-old veteran who flew those World War II bombers. So it creates a connection of what those kids did and what they sacrificed to get there. So it creates a feeling of you really want to get it right, to honor their memory, to honor what they did. And the sacrifices they made. So it creates a connection that just makes it more than a simple photograph.
Well, and what you photograph affects the kids of those kids, or the kids of those grandparents. Because again, as I look through your portfolio, the memories that came through of my dad as I'm looking through your classic Warbird stuff was powerful, like literally a powerful inside feeling I get from looking at those. So, okay, let's bring up this shot because this thing is insane. I call this the B-29 Dock in flight. Do you name your photos?
No, I have not been very good at that.
Okay.
I probably should. I know the image number is 7474.
Oh, really? That's good. Okay, B-29 Dock in flight. Gorgeous shot. Let's start with the technical stuff and we'll get into the creative stuff. So first of all, and I know you have the EXIF data in front of you. Here's what I got when I pulled up this shot. Tell me where I'm wrong. This is what's listed in the EXIF data. It was a Nikon D850, correct?
Correct.
Okay. 24-70 lens at 38 millimeters, which I've got questions on that actually. The shutter was 1/25th of a second, another big question for me. Aperture f11, ISO 140, auto white balance in manual. Did I get anything wrong there? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it was 1/125th of a second.
I'm sorry, 1/125th of a second. Okay.
Correct.
So,
correct.
First of all, the plane itself, okay, with that technical info, before we get into the breaking down my questions on that exposure data, explain the dock to me.
So Dock is a B-29 bomber, like we've talked about. It was built in 1944. It was built right here in Wichita, Kansas. It was delivered to the Army Air Corps in 1945. It never saw combat service, so its wartime duty was flying as a radar calibration plane out over the coast up in upper northeast United States. When it was retired, they sent it to the Naval Weapons Testing Center. So it sat out in the desert, the Mojave Desert, as a target for 40, 50 years. And the stories are endless. We could go through how it didn't get hit and all of that. But the short story is it was able to be pulled out of the desert. They got it out. They disassembled it as much as they could. They put it on 7 flatbed trailers. They shipped it to Wichita, Kansas, where we did the restoration. It was a 16-year restoration process. The significance of the B-29 is that it was developed during the World War II because we did not have a aircraft capable of what we needed to accomplish in the Pacific Theater. And so obviously everybody knows or should know the historical significance of the Enola Gay and Boxcar and the missions they provided. But, that was the genesis, or that's what the B-29 did. The restoration process, it was volunteer hours, over 450,000 volunteer hours that went into restoring the plane. Its mission now is to honor, educate, and connect. So we obviously, first and foremost, want to honor those people who served, the men who flew them, the women who built them. We want to educate the current generation of what it stood for, what those people did, and then make that connection so that when you have, especially when we're flying an air show or something, you hope to make that connection where some kid runs out and, 8-year-old captures a picture of it flying over with his, cell phone and runs in and shows his dad, and his dad says, well, yeah, your grandpa flew those. And, and now there's that connection between generations. So that's the significance of what it is.
So, okay. So first of all, I love the fact that you said the men who flew them and the women who built them, because there is history there that everybody really should look up. And then the fact that it was on a target range and didn't get hit is somewhat fascinating. Before I go into my questions on the exposure, for those of you on the audio feed, I do this every show. For those of you on the audio feed, I am going to try and describe this shot to you verbally. It's not going to be easy, because there's some little intricate parts of this I'm not sure I know how to put into words, but let me give it a shot. First of all, I want to start here. This photo feels cinematic to me. Like it reminds me of a classic war movie in the coloring. The position of the camera, I think, is actually kind of cool. So this is an in-air shot. This is air to air. It's shot from up high. You can see the landscape down, beautiful landscape behind it. The landscape is the lower third of the shot. In that landscape, not even the lower third, just a little less than that. In that landscape, you see fields and trees and a wide forking, either river or lake. The two upper thirds and a little more than that are nothing but sky with these soft, warm, scattered clouds. Now the key part in the background, as I mentioned a second ago, the color grading is amazing. This thing is rich, it's vibrant, it's super warm with yellows and oranges. And on its own, like if that plane was not there, on its own, this is a great Brett Schauf landscape image. Like this is, and that's why I asked that question before of where you see the connection, because this is a landscape image in and of itself. And then you stick a B-29 in the middle of the photo. Now, photographing this, you're slightly below it. You're shooting a little bit up on it, which I love. I'll explain why in a minute. There's something that your angle causes here that I absolutely think makes the shot in some ways. You fill the frame left to right. I mean, the wingspan on this thing is insane. There are some shots I see of the B-29, some of yours as well, where even the tips of the wings are not in there, because getting this big of a plane in a shot is not easy from its width. And it's a compositional issue because the plane itself is so wide, and yet it's a plane. It's not super tall. So compositionally, if you shoot wide enough like this to get the full tip to tip wingspan, you end up with a ton of space above it and a ton of space below it because it's effectively a very wide, not very tall subject matter. And that's where this landscape comes in. It is tack sharp, except for the four props. The props are blurred, and I love this. The edge of the props have yellow on them, so when they're spinning, you get this yellow outline around the blur. You can see in the cockpit on this shot. Whole plane, nose to tail, totally in focus. And here's the thing, as was customary with all of these planes, on the nose there is a moniker, DOC, and then an image of Doc from the Seven Dwarfs. This is, to me, stunning, but then you add the part that I think makes the angle. Like the reason you're shooting from under it makes the shot, and it's this. This is a shiny silver fuselage. So the plane is shiny. Because of the angle that you're at, you're catching the reflection of the sky in the top half of the plane and the ground, and you see details in these reflections. The ground in the bottom half of the frame, and had you been higher, that center point between the sky reflection and ground reflection would have moved up or down the plane. But because of where you are and the angle of the light attack, it's dead center down the middle of the fuselage. It splits it right down the middle, ground on the bottom, sky on the top half. And I think in some ways that makes the shot. Did I miss anything that I should have pointed out?
No, I think you've noticed things that I may not have even noticed. It's a great description of the photo. Obviously, in a shoot like this, it's one out of a series of shots that you just has the best composition, has those elements you're talking about. But no, your description was dead on.
Okay, so now I got to ask about this. First of all, 38 millimeters seems too tight to me. I'm surprised you got this. How far away are you?
So the plane we're flying in right there is maybe, so as a reference point, the wingspan tip to tip is 140 feet. So as a reference point, we're probably about 150 to 200 feet separation. So
you're pretty close then.
It's a pretty tight formation right there.
So with that in mind, then, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I say it might have been just a little bit more, but it usually we fly somewhere. I love to shoot, in that 50 to 70 millimeter range. But when you get the opportunity and the plane closes up into that tight of formation, I guess that's why we use zoom lenses.
Yeah, exactly. So would you have cropped this? I usually do the post stuff at the end, but I have to know one question. Would you have cropped this, or was this pretty much the crop out of camera?
No, it's cropped. There's probably, there's quite a bit more dead space, what I would call dead space in front of the plane. the crop to me is part of the composition. Being able to kind of situate the plane just a little bit above the center line. But
So
again,
good.
keeping the wingtip to wingtip.
Yeah, it's so good. And really the fact that this is again a thing I talk about when I do image competitions, the fact that the right wing is tight to the edge, or plane's left wing, camera right wing. And yet there's a little more room on the other side. So the plane has nose room to fly into. The F-11 here works fantastic, makes total sense because everything is frickin' tack sharp except for the moving shutters, the moving propellers. The shutter though at 1/125th does confuse me. I realize that you want the blur in the propellers. I get that. I'm going to bring that up again in a minute. But still, you're moving, you're bouncing, you're in a plane that's flying, it's moving, it's bouncing. I know people who can't shoot a portrait at 1/125th of a second because the person can't stand still enough that you don't get motion blur then. Am I wrong? Is 1/125th really slow for this?
Honestly, it's a lot faster than I would like.
Really?
Ideally in that situation with that plane, I'm shooting a 60th, maybe an 80th of a second.
Why?
Just again, I know that's what it's going to take to give me that full propeller spin.
Wow.
Especially on slower speeds. I do cheat. I use I've got a Kenyan gyro that I mount the camera to. So it creates a tripod effect without having a tripod. It creates its own gravity field. If you've never used one, it's a great workout to do. But they're ingenious pieces of equipment that just mount behind, underneath the camera, and they spin, and basically they have gyros that create a gravity field that really go a long ways into helping you hold a camera that steady.
Okay, so then here's the question. I'm assuming this is, you put a camera on a tripod, and most people say turn off image stabilization in camera because the gyro goes against it being stable. So if you've put it on on effectively a tripod that is also a gyro, I'm assuming you turn off any on or in camera stabilization as well, right?
Sometimes. A lot of times I'll still leave the lens stabilization on and just turn off the electric assisted stabilization in camera.
And you don't see any issue with
most of the time. Every once in a while, I'll get something that looks really, really wonky where you can see where the stabilization was fighting the gyro. So yeah, every once in a while you'll get some pretty interesting effects. Again, when you're shooting something like this, you're in a burst mode. You're not just taking one shot. I'll usually shoot 3 to 5 frame bursts, understanding that the first one's going to be blurry because I'm pushing the trigger down. Second or third, maybe the fourth shot's going to be the sharpest of the bunch, and cold that way.
So, by the way, what kind of plane are you in here?
So in this shoot specifically, we were in a Beechcraft Bonanza, which is a small single engine plane. Okay. What we do is we mount it so we're able to take the doors off of it and shoot through about a 3 foot by 4 foot square opening. Just kind of hang out behind the wing and have an unobstructed view.
So help me understand this shoot a little bit. You're flying. You're probably going above the plane, below the plane. Was the being a little below center here, below the B-29? I'm assuming that was an intentional positioning for you at this point.
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of times, we'll brief different shots, and I've got communication to the pilot in our plane, and he'll relay position changes to the subject plane, in this case, the B-29. So in that case, we're just communicating. It's right at sunset. The sun's probably down below the horizon. We're flying towards the west, which creates a lot of that light coloration in the background from the haze on to the east and north of the plane. So the direction you're looking at the photo is kind of northeast. But yeah, we make corrections. Typically the platform plane or the plane that I'm in doesn't do a lot of elevation changes. We'll set a course. A lot of times we'll fly 360s, just creating different light patterns as we make that circle. And then we'll just direct the positioning of the plane through the pilot and our plane. And just, up, back, forward, backwards, in, out, elevation changes, things like that.
So 24 to 70, is that pretty standard for you? I mean, it's a good zoom range for what you need to shoot. What goes into that lens choice? Do you ever go, 15 to 35 or 16 to 35, or do you ever go 70 to 200? I mean, obviously 70 to 200, you'd have to be, especially for this thing, you'd have to be, in the next state to get tip to tip on this thing. But what goes into the lens choice?
I always have multiple lenses. I never go up without multiple cameras, multiple lenses. In this specific shoot, the 24 to 70 was because I knew that was the only plane we were flying with. The 70 it wasn't going to get further than that. And if it did, I would just grab the 70 to 200 that was sitting right next to me. The 24 to 70 for that plane, like you said, it's 140-foot wingspan. It gives me the greatest flexibility for a close formation shoot. There are a lot of other planes that I will shoot a 24 to 120 or a 70 to 200. If I'm shooting a small single engine marketing campaign, I've got a 70 to 200 80% of the time. And just because I can crop in, I can get that tight shot of the pilot. I can get, the full 70, I can get the full airplane. I love the 70 to 200 here because I'm able to zoom in and get, if I want to get a close cockpit shot, then maybe just show the nose, the pilot, and the right side engines. I'm able to do that. But to build in that sky, that landscape, everything we talked about earlier, I wanted to go a little wider. And the 24 to 70 is just such a functional lens that it gives me the ability to do that.
So compositionally, you're sitting in this plane, you're looking at this, you're under it a little bit, you're seeing this in real time. Compositionally, what, and for that matter, after the fact too, what goes through your head composing this? Because a lot of people would have done this different. A lot of people would have pulled the top down, gotten more land. There's a number of ways, obviously, that you could compose this, but I would argue that the lower third being land, the upper third emphasizing that you're in the air, the being under the plane, making it look just like when you take a portrait, right? You shoot up on somebody, they're Superman, you shoot down on them, they're not. This makes this into the hero plane because you're shooting up on it. Plus, again, the reflections that are in the plane. What's going through Brett's mind compositionally as you make this?
Honestly, there's probably more about lighting and exposure going through my mind because the plane is, to a small degree, is going to be where it is. I'm making corrections of it. I want it above the horizon line. I know in 15 seconds after I take that shot, we're going into a left turn and I'm going to have a silhouette because it's going to be backlit. And so I'm just trying to get, I love to see the little bit of kick of light off the props. Again, it's a plane that's flying. It's you want that lower, that strong aspect of it, that lower looking up, dynamics positioning of the plane. But I want to capture that with the light. So the light you can kind of see is coming in right off the nose, just a little bit to the left of the airplane's nose. And I'm just trying to make the clouds and the land and everything work together.
And it does. And I was actually going to ask you, so the sun is, and you, like you say, you can tell this from the nose, the sun is to your left and behind you, right?
Correct.
Okay. Which just runs this perfect rim of light on every piece of it. In fact, as I'm looking at it now, as we're talking, the shadowness under the camera right plane left wing, there's detail there, but you can tell that it's shadowed, which just adds, we're photographing light, light illuminates, shadows define type thing. You shoot this, you bring it back, you bring it up on the computer. What is your normal post-processing workflow? Are there any apps, for example, that you always use, you can't live without?
Oh, definitely. The first process is Camera Lightroom, Adobe's Lightroom product. That's a great exposure balancing. I do all my culling there. But once I've identified an image that I want to take further, like this one, then I'll dig into Lightroom and I will basically do all my camera exposure adjustments, color balance, any tweaking like that. From there, it'll go into a Photoshop where I can dodge and burn, get a little more dodge and burn on the subject or on the foreground, things like that. And then I use a lot of On1's program. I'll use their On1 program just to kind of add a little bit of contrast and clarity to it. Sometimes if I need some sharpening, I'll go into Topaz Labs and run one of their sharpening programs, or AI Sharpen. Is a pretty typical workflow.
Okay, that makes sense. So what would you have done, do you think, to this shot? Especially the color here, by the way. Was this, I mean, did you see this warm, rich color in the field, or is this something you pumped up a little bit in post, or?
Probably a little of both. I always struggle with the over editing process, and I don't want to ever over edit. But this is right at blue hour. So this is, like I said, the sun is probably just under the horizon. So it just gives you all those gold tones. There's a lot of smoke in the air, because this is, during a time where we had some, a lot of haze in the air, which, as you know, will just really reflect that light and just give you some of the best sunsets. I shoot a lot of sunsets. Being in Kansas, we have a lot of wide open spaces, and we have a lot of gorgeous sunsets. So, I mean, the colors are what's there. There's no adding color or painting. There's some adjusting of the, vibrant sliders. I try not to touch that saturation slider.
And then you cropped it, obviously.
Temperature balance.
Correct. What would you have dodged and burned here? Do you know?
Definitely darkened up the ground around the water, just so there's no highlights that distract your eye or draw your eye down. The first thing I want to see is the airplane. So I would have gone in and accentuated some of the highlights on the plane to make sure, those highlights are popping. Some of the shadow areas of the plane, I probably lifted a little bit to just show some of that detail. The sky was probably left alone, and then the ground would have been darkened a little bit, especially in the corners. Just really trying to make sure the first thing you see is that the props in the plane.
Speaking of which, when we were going back and forth on shots, and I had suggested a shot of this to you, and one of your comments was the props weren't full circle on the one that we had talked about. Right. Even though they were blurred, which was interesting to me. Like, they had a full motion blur, but there were gaps in the prop. Why is that? Why does that? I'm assuming that obviously that's critical, right? That you want to see that full circle. But how is it possible it blurred the prop and yet you had complete gaps? You'd think that it would blur the whole thing.
Well, so the props are rotating probably 2,000 RPM. Is usually what those props are. So at 1/125th of a second, those props move, and they're 17-foot diameter props. So it's a big arc. So at 1/125th of a second, it creates about a 60% full disc radius. And so obviously, through the use of Photoshop, we're able to go in and add that full disc. It just really highlights the motion and the propellant and just the movement of the airplane, the dynamic positioning of it.
It's just so good. It's just so good. All right. Again, thank you for walking us through this shot. I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to switch to a speed round. I ask a question, whatever comes to your head, that's the first answer. So number one.
That could be dangerous.
It could be dangerous. I guess it supposes, depends on where we go. Let's start with aviation photography. What is your top aviation photography tip? Because a lot of people go shoot air shows and stuff. So top aviation photography tip.
Be prepared, especially if you're going to go up and do air to air. Have a backup camera, have backup gear. Aviation is a moving target in more ways than just the subjects you're shooting. So it's just to have that mental preparedness, have that gear preparedness, just to be ready to adapt. There's so many times that you think you're going to get something, and it throws you a different curveball. I was at an air show this weekend, and Saturday it rained all day long, and so most of the planes couldn't fly. You're shooting a lot of ground shots, crowd shots, people. The planes that do fly, you're shooting them into a complete white sky or cloudy sky. So you just have to kind of adjust and be prepared for a lot of different scenarios.
Okay. Top landscape photography tip.
The most cliche thing there is you have to just see the light. Just really see how that light, especially, 10 minutes in a landscape can make a huge difference. I've seen so many photographers, and I've been out with so many photographers that'll pack it in, 30 minutes before sundown and just miss that perfect golden hour, that just last kiss of light on the earth. And what it does to the sky when we can no longer see the sun on the horizon, it's still lighting up the sky, and it creates such drama and such depth of color. I think just understanding that. The other thing is try to build something of interest in the foreground. It's easy just to walk out and see a gorgeous mountain vista and throw a 14 millimeter on and take a picture. That's really cool and nice, but it doesn't have anything to draw the viewer in. So you're always compositionally trying to look at something that's going to draw the viewer in, to make them feel like they're there, whether it be, an interesting tree or rock or something in the foreground, just to make that more personal, or just to bring that viewer into that position a little bit more, experience it a little closer.
Okay. Biggest photography related mistake that you've made or almost made?
So the biggest mistake I've made is when I started with the B-29, I did not keep a good enough record of the veterans and people I was documenting. I made quick notes. I didn't, but I had access to a lot of veterans and heroes that I've got photos of, but it is hard to go back 7 years later and try to remember exactly, who they were. And so I'm struggling with that now, going back and trying to dig up all these notes off little notepads and say, okay, oh yeah, that's that guy. That's his story. The ones that I was able to shoot video on, I have all that, but they're still just those passing vignettes of, man, I wish I could remember how to get in touch with him or what his name was. So. Okay.
Favorite composition rule, if you have one?
It's got to be the rule of thirds, and knowing when to break it. I like to shoot, and as a commercial photographer, you're always looking to create negative space, and the rule of thirds just kind of gives you a good starting point to leave room for text and headings and different things like that. So I usually at least have that in the back of my head. I may break it, and I may shoot a bullseye photo, but there's usually a reason I'm doing it that way. But start with trying to understand the rule of thirds, and when it doesn't work.
Favorite band or performer?
You'll laugh because I know 3 or 4 other of the interviews you've done have said the same thing. But Foo Fighters comes to mind just because the energy, and I was able to photograph them when they came to town, and just so much energy, so much, you could just feel the passion they have for their art. That it's hard not to just have such a deep appreciation for that. Other than that, I'd probably go back to Billy Joel, just because of, the time and the era and just the ballad types that he has.
It's funny, being in rock radio, I play Foo Fighters all the time. And I'm a Dave Grohl fan, and I've been a Foo Fighters fan, but nothing huge until I photographed them. And I've photographed them a number of times now. And when you see the Foo Fighters live, when you see Dave Grohl front that band live, they are so fantastic. Favorite drink?
A Manhattan, bourbon Manhattan. Perfect.
Okay. I'm a whiskey collector, so you're right up my alley. Favorite movie or TV show?
The TV show is going to be MASH. I thought about, just going back, and that's one that just resonates with your childhood and growing up, and how they're able to take such a serious topic and add such comedy to it.
Over and over again.
Something from the childhood. Yeah, absolutely. It just, The range of emotions that a 30-minute sitcom was able to invoke is just, I don't know, to me, it's just one of the classics.
There are two different MASH related documentaries where they talk to the stars and they go through the making of MASH that are absolutely fascinating to watch. And I kind of want to go back. I've thought about this recently, is why I know this. I kind of want to go back and watch MASH from episode 1 in chronological order, but it's not on any of the services that I subscribe to. It is out there. I think it's on Hulu, but it's not on a service that I subscribe to. Last question. Is there a photographer out there that you think more people need to know about and should follow?
There are so many amazing photographers out there. We are in a golden age of just so much great content, so many people just doing so many great things. From a local standpoint, one of the photographers I work with locally a lot, and I just love his editorial style, is a guy named Travis Hine. He works for our local paper, but his shots are just, and his thought process and his work process and how he sets it up is just incredible. I always learn something every time I go out and shoot from him.
Okay. I will make
more
sure
recently on a national.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just more recently on a national level. I've been following a lot of Seth Miranda. Again, it comes back to just the energy and passion he has for what he's doing. And then I don't know that this guy could take any more recognition, but Joel Grimes is a personal favorite of just, again, his process and the passion he has for his craft is just amazing.
Joel is one of the nicest guys. And actually he posted something on Instagram, an Instagram story the other day, that I reshared because it was so good what he said, and he does it all the time. And he's got amazing classes. He's been on the show, super nice guy. I will have links to those photographers in the show notes over at behindtheshot.tv. So, pull up your web browser, go to it's not .com, behindtheshot.tv, and find this episode. And again, you'll find a small bit that I wrote about Brett. You'll find all the links that we talk about, everything pretty much that you need there, or on YouTube. It's down in the description. So Brett, if people want to connect with you, I've been putting up your lower thirds as we go through the video, but for those on audio, let's just run through them verbally. What's your website? You have two different websites.
I have two websites. My personal website is brett.photo, and then my commercial website is tjstudios.com.
Instagram and Twitter, or X, but I'm going to call it Twitter until I die probably. Instagram and Twitter, it's at Brett Photo, right?
Correct.
And then Facebook is B Schauf, and Schauf is SCHAUF.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Brett, again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. And to Dr. T over at Platypod, thank you for introducing us as well.
Thank you. It was an honor. I appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. Again, thank you to my guest this time around, Brett Schauf. Make sure you check out his work. All the links that you need, behindtheshot.tv. You can find them all there. If you want to find me, it's at Steve Brazill, like the country Brazil, but 2 L's. That's my personal website, my portfolio. And then, of course, on social media, everywhere. Instagram, X, Mastodon, Blue Sky. It's at Steve Brazill for me personally. For the podcast, wherever the podcast is, it's at Behind the Shot TV. Thank you to everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. If you do end up watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you like and subscribe. That is, if you like and want to see more of this content. Make sure you hit the bell, do all that type stuff. If you are watching or listening to this in a podcast app, please, wherever it is, Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, please make sure to subscribe. And also, please make sure to drop, hopefully you liked it enough to leave 5 stars, a nice review, written review. All of that is very, very much appreciated. Make sure you join us next time as we try and get inside the mind of a great photographer by taking a closer look behind the shot.